Welcome to another edition of Padres and Pints. Wherever you're heading, if you're in your car, it doesn't matter where you're going, you should listen on into Padres and Pints. Padres and Pints, we're easy to find.
Welcome to another edition of Padres and Pints. I am your host, Rick, and joining me is Sackbunk Chris.
Not sponsored by anything.
Not sponsored by anything. And our special guest today is the one and only Jesse Agler.
Thank you for having me, guys.
No. Thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.
We've got a lot to talk about. Padres Social Hour is a very social show. However, I feel like we've never been able to get to know the real Jesse. We've never got to dig deep and get all the details on you.
There's a lot of depth. Let me tell you.
So that's what we're going to start with. Why don't we say, we're not going to go from childbirth, but we'll go from when you got your start into baseball, when you started to love baseball and started to broadcast baseball.
Well, my love for baseball, I think my father would argue, actually started the day I was born. The story he and my mom always tell is that on the way to the hospital, he jumped the curb, and my mom says, "What's that?" I just realized my son was going to be born on opening day. So my dad's a huge baseball fan, so it began very, very early for me. I got into the mindset of being sort of fascinated by broadcasters, sportscasters, baseball in particular, at a really young age. Probably in 9, 10, 11 years old, I started thinking that's cool. They not only get to watch the game every day, they get to talk about the game, they get to describe the game. So I was fascinated with it really, really, really early on. And I sort of dedicated myself at some point in that, general part of my life to making a career out of it, or trying to make a career out of it. And that's when it started. So it's not like I woke up a few weeks ago and was like, let's try broadcasting. This seems cool. Yeah, no, I mean it's something I've been working at a really long time.
What brought you to San Diego?
This job, and a lot of luck, I feel like. So the story basically starts with the day I'm interviewing for a job with the Dolphins, summer 2010, maybe May or June of 2010. And I had been really sick. I had a bad flu, 100 whatever fever, out of it, just felt like crap, right? Right. And I had sort of had my first two meetings with Mike D, who was the president of the Dolphins at the time, postponed because of his schedule. And I got kind of a call that morning from Wayne Partello, now here also, saying, hey, Mike's got an opening in his schedule today at 11 or whatever it was. And this was at 9, come on down to meet Mike. And kind of, it's the last thing I needed to do okay at to get that job. And I was like, okay. I'm not going to tell him I'm sick and in bed and I feel terrible. So I'm all hopped up on flu medicine, and I go down to the stadium. And in all seriousness, I remember very little of the day. That's how out of it I was. I just felt terrible, as sick as I've ever been. And so we start talking in the interview, and he asked a question, which I love, and I now ask this question to anybody I'm interviewing for an internship or someone to work for us. What's your dream job? If I gave you a magic wand, what would be your dream job? And without even thinking, I'm now presently interviewing for a job with the Dolphins. I said, it would be a play-by-play guy for a baseball team.
Really?
Just I answered honestly and in the Dayquil haze or whatever. And so he knew right away I was a big baseball guy and a huge baseball fan. And he remembered that, which I thought was really cool. And so, when Mike ended up going from the Dolphins to the Padres, and later Wayne to the Dolphins to the Padres, they knew, hey, we like Jesse, we've worked with Jesse, we know Jesse, and we know Jesse's dream forever since he was a kid was to be a baseball broadcaster. So they kept that in mind, and I was fortunate enough at the end of that Dolphin season, they gave me a call and they said, what do you think about San Diego? And I said, well, I've never heard anything but amazing things about it, but I've never been. So why don't you come out, we'll talk about, maybe some things. So I flew out, and, you get off the plane, and it's oh man, this is, right away, this is unbelievable. Flying in, you see downtown, this is unbelievable. And so, I interviewed over the course of that weekend, and we were able to work something out. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
Nice.
So when you came to San Diego, I'm sure you had some expectations, right? Like you said, you heard things about it. Let's put the weather aside for a second because we talk about that a lot, but it's been talked about to death. Aside from the weather, like what were some of your expectations of being with the Padres and being in San Diego?
I think I really like the idea of, so one of the first things I noticed when we were taking the cab from the airport, like that night, we came in, landed at like 10:30 at night or whatever, and we're driving through downtown to get to the hotel, and I was looking around, and I said to my wife, I said, oh, this is like a much bigger city than I thought it was. I guess in my head, I don't know what I imagined, but driving through downtown, from the airport to really the ballpark, I was looking around, I was like, oh, this is like a legitimate urban center here, and I really didn't know much about the city from that standpoint.
Right.
And that excited me. And I started immediately sort of fantasizing about living downtown and walking to the games and all the cool bars and restaurants that would be downtown, all of which has really been the case, which is awesome. So that was like a really pleasant surprise right out of the chute. And yeah, the weather is part of it. I had, only seen Petco on television, obviously. And the first time I saw that next morning, I was like, oh, this is like one of the 2 or 3 nicest parks in baseball. Like I didn't realize that, and I don't think TV does it justice.
Right.
And I remember talking to some ESPN people last year, that Sunday night opener against the Dodgers, and that was the first game I'd been to there, which is crazy to think about. And they were like blown away by the place. And I was like, yeah, you guys need to be here much more regularly. And it's funny because when the winter meetings were here last year, all the MLB people were saying the same thing about the ballpark and about the city. And for whatever reason, it's like this little tucked away secret, I think, to a lot of people on the East Coast. And it shouldn't be. Maybe it's good that it is because it keeps it a little smaller and more quiet, but it's this unbelievable place, and the question I always ask people is why don't more people live here? Like, I genuinely don't understand it. It's got everything. It's got everything, and I don't know why the population isn't higher than it is. I'm not saying it should be, like, from art, it would be better. Like, it might not be better if it were, but I don't understand why. And usually the answer I get from people is, oh, it's expensive. And I'm like, well, New York's expensive, San Francisco's expensive, Washington's expensive, and there are a lot of people that live in those places. So I haven't figured it out yet. I think it's just one of those little secrets that people don't really fully appreciate. I know everybody here appreciates it, but it's wild, man. It's an unbelievable place.
Yeah, it's a thing where, like, I don't think I could ever move from here. Like, I grew up here my whole life, and it's just something where I have no desire to leave at all.
Why would you?
I know, right?
Yeah, I spent 4 years, I grew up in San Diego, and spent 4 years in Stockton, California. And people always ask me, like, why would you do that? Well, I went there for school, and it was a great experience, but I came back right away. Like, it's incredible.
Yeah, if you can do it, and you got the job and the family and all that, it lines up and it works, it's a tough place to leave, man.
It's good to hear. Just like you.
Thank you.
So along those same lines, you came from the Dolphins, obviously a football team. You had some prior experience working in baseball, if I understand that right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Quite a bit.
What was that experience? What were you doing?
So in college, first day, University of Miami on campus, freshman year, like before classes even started, I found the radio station office.
Wow.
I walked in, I said I want to be a sportscaster.
Fresh out of high school, right?
Yeah. And I had interned in high school with what is now Fox Sports Florida. At the time, the Sunshine Network, became Sun Sports, part of Fox Sports Florida. I'd interned with them. In my senior year of high school, I somehow found out that at one point my high school had a radio station. They didn't anymore, so I was in the TV production class. I went to the teacher, Mr. Weddle. I was like, hey, I heard we had a radio station. He's like, yeah, there's some equipment back there. Feel free to like have at it. So I'm not technically savvy at all, but I have a really good friend who is. So I was like, hey, Dave, take a look at this stuff. And
He was the original blooper.
He was the original blooper. David Pfeffer, who's like an aeronautical engineer, legitimately, like literally. So he's moved on past pirate radio. But he's like, all right, you got most of what you need, but there's no antenna. And he's like, I think my dad from his fishing boat has like an old Loran antenna. Remember Lorans? They were like before GPS. So yeah, you're too young. Like, so immediately before like GPS became sort of a thing for like fishing, Lorans were a thing. And so it had like an antenna, and he somehow rigged the deal so that we could transmit on this antenna. So senior year of high school, football games, we stuck the antenna like on this gate outside the little like booth, at the top of the football stadium, and I broadcast games with my buddy. Baseball season came around and did that, and we just sort of did this. And The station may or may not have been licensed, but it didn't go beyond the parking lot, so we kind of were like, whatever.
We're not going to turn you in.
Yeah. So yeah, we were heard by the people in the stadium who brought radios. So like 2 people. But it was a cool way to like experience it, and not only that, it sort of reaffirmed like, all right, this is a lot of fun. I love this. So I go to college. I knew Miami had a really active student radio station, big part of why I went there. And day one, walk in, I want to be a sportscaster. They're like, cool, there's a meeting, you know, come and say hi. Come to the meeting, blah, blah, blah. Got involved right away. The great thing about the radio station there is they broadcast every home football game that year. They broadcast every women's basketball game home and away. And they broadcast every baseball game home and away. Baseball team would win the national championship that year. And it meant there were a ton of opportunities. So, you know, you sort of cut your teeth at first, and they have you run the board and produce the broadcasts, and eventually get an opportunity to call some women's basketball games and some baseball games. And so for 4 years, I broadcast a ton of Hurricane sports, all the sports. We started volleyball my senior year, I think. I was the sports director my sophomore year. I was the GM of the station my junior and senior years. Loved it, loved it, loved it. 2 days after I graduate, I hop in the car with my dad, drive to Elkhart, Kansas, which is in the bottom left-hand corner of the state of Kansas. And I had gotten a job broadcasting for the Elkhart Dusters of the Jayhawk League, which is like a Cape Cod league, like a summer wood bat, you know, college players. And it's a town of 2,000. Like my high school had more than that people, more than that number of people.
And you lived there?
And I lived there for the whole summer, broadcasting baseball games. Team was terrible. They folded at the end of the season.
Oh, that's awful. You think losing is bad. Imagine not existing anymore.
All of it. But it was an experience to broadcast games basically every single day, to do those 10-hour bus rides all over Kansas, you know, into Colorado, into, I think Missouri, we even had one series there. There was one pretty good player on the team. He was a power-hitting corner outfielder, Mike Dunn, the Marlins reliever.
Yeah,
So he was like our best hitter.
He was the best hitter.
And he's now a relief pitcher for the Marlins. So that gives you maybe an idea. And he could hit. Don't get me wrong, but like that was it. That was like all the talent. No, I shouldn't say it. There were guys that had really nice college careers. A couple guys that played in the minors, but like you weren't gonna get a lot of major leaguers off that team, and they struggled. But it was broadcasting day in, day out by myself. I set up the equipment. I was the color guy. I was the play-by-play guy. So it was a great experience. So moved back to South Florida after that season. I feel like this is very long-winded and uninteresting, but I made contacts at the big sports radio station down there, and I auditioned for a job with them, and they hired me when I got back. And that's sort of how I got my professional start. And I spun that into a few interesting things, a Marlins talk show. I created a giant PowerPoint presentation for the program director. I said, hey, Sundays after the Marlin games, we go right to ESPN Radio. We should have like a talk show. I was like, I should host it, and here's why. It was like a 25-slide PowerPoint, and after 3 slides, he's like, yeah, fine, that's whatever. If you got it.
Whatever you want.
Made the presentation. That's enough to get the job.
It was. So I got to do that, and then I somehow, through good fortune and getting to know the right people, spun that into being the pregame, intermission, and postgame host for the Panthers, the hockey team, the next hockey season. And that spun into doing that for the Marlins, because the baseball and the hockey seasons pretty much end and begin, especially when you're not making the playoffs, and neither was, like right at the right times. So I went right into Panthers to Marlins, to a second Panthers season, to a second Marlins season. And with the Marlins, I got to fill in as the play-by-play guy. I was 24, doing Major League Baseball on the radio, and I was like, I'm in. And so after the 2007 season, the Marlins went to a different radio station. I worked for the station, not for the team, and that was it. And I was done with the Marlins. And I thought I was in such a good position, and it was a great experience. But I went from 2007 to 2014 last year in between calling Major League Baseball games. 7 years.
Wow.
So, in the interim, I did a lot of different things with radio stations in South Florida. I started to get a little TV experience. I was calling high school football, including the Padres' first pick this year, and last year, Trey Turner Park visit to that high school. I called like a playoff football game for that high school, like for a station, just anything I could to keep busy. I did traffic reporting, like no helicopter, just sitting at the desk. And I definitely thought, hey, this might not happen as a career. That got to that point. And then 2010 NFL draft. I was given the opportunity to host a portion of the Dolphins draft coverage. They had just moved to the station I was working at, and Wayne was sort of, who I'd never met or spoken to before in my life, was sort of given this giant draft extravaganza to produce. And because I worked at the station, they threw me a bone and they let me host the 6th and 7th rounds, the last 2 rounds of that year's NFL draft. And it's like, you never heard of any of these guys, that are getting drafted. And I treated it like an audition. And it went really well. And they called me like the next day and said, hey, we'd really love to talk to you about this job. And that was the Dolphin job that I was at for 4 seasons.
Nice. So that was actually the setup for the question I was leading towards.
Sorry.
No.
I did a Brady Phelps. I talked too long.
No, that was very thorough. I couldn't ask for anything.
And then
more.
Jeff Cirillo. We love you, Brady.
Yeah.
Before we get into anything else, as a Dolphins fan in San Diego here, I gotta ask you, what's a favorite Dan Marino story for you?
He is just a cool guy to be around. Like they say about certain politicians or whatever, they got that charisma, that glow, that aura. You're around the guy, and a lot of it, I'm sure, is the ridiculous accomplishments, but you get to be around him, and I was lucky enough to get to be around him a little bit, and it's just like, wow. Like, it's cool. Like, fanboy. Like, this is so cool. Like, he's one of those guys. He's one of the greatest players in the history of that sport, and he's just, it's neat. And I don't want to say I had like private moments with him, but I had a couple of moments where it was kind of like we're just sitting around BSing, and it's like you have to realize what's happening, and you're like, that's so cool. Even if it's small talk,
Yeah.
you're like, weather, whatever. Like, I mean, it was really extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
I can imagine. I'm jealous.
Okay, all right, Rick. Let's back to Padres.
All right, we're done with Dolphins and drinks right now. We're done with Dolphins and drinks.
Saying that, haven't you?
Now we get to,
So we're going to Padres and Pints again.
now I get to ask my question. So you covered lots of baseball before the Dolphins. How did you prepare for coming to the Padres? Because you've never really done much in San Diego. You've never been in San Diego.
You're gonna love the answer.
Okay.
I read everything I could on the team, including the blogs. Like,
Including the blogs.
all of them. So like, I'm sure I read stuff that you guys wrote long before we met. The internet's such a great resource, right? Start following people on Twitter. I think you were actually one of the first San Diego people to sort of put one and one together. With me coming out here, and it was probably before it was even official. You might have been a little premature there.
I was premature.
That's how you broke the
I
news,
mean,
man.
yeah, because
Conversations were
Dolphins
taking
fan
place.
and Padres fan, and then actually Darren Smith had mentioned something like there's a Dolphins guy coming on board.
Yeah.
And then like I kind of put it together. I was like, was Jesse?
So I did a lot of reading.
you can tell.
I eventually started following you guys on Twitter once I felt comfortable that like the news was out there. That's such a funny thing, by the way. Like 5 years ago, you would have never thought about that. Like, oh, I'm taking on this new job, but it's not really official yet. Like, I want to follow, like the power users and the bloggers to start getting information. But I also know that someone will put it together, and that's not appropriate necessarily. Like, such a weird thing to have to think about and be aware of. But
Twitter, right?
it is what it
Twitter
is.
is just weird in general.
Yeah, but it's a great tool though, man. It's such a good tool. So, then I start following you guys, and I pick up more people, and you see who's retweeting, and, all right, you go to a blog, and you click the byline, and all right, good, this guy's on Twitter, and you get into it. So there's that. I went to Padres.com. I read, like, everything Corey Brock had written for the last however long. This one was really useful, sort of dumb luck. At the end of the 13th season, I guess, there was like a big town hall at Petco, I think for season ticket members, and Fox Sports San Diego carried it. And so the full video, and I think it was like an hour or two long, was on Padres.com. And I was like, oh, this is unbelievable, because it was fans talking to the front office about baseball issues and business issues that they cared about. And I was like, perfect. That's what you want to. You want to know the heartbeat, and you want to know what people care about. You want to know what they're interested in. You don't want to come in clueless, and so the internet is so valuable with that. And then once it became official, I started talking to people, and obviously got to be around the organization, having access to people in the organization makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
You can tell all that preparation that you did.
You got to, man. You know what the other key was? Is that spring training, to be immersed in it for 6 weeks, and to just be in Peoria that whole time.
Like the roster crunching and everything changing, phone and all that.
Hugely valuable. Hugely. But that's the only way I would do that. You can't half-ass something like that. We can curse on this, right?
Oh yeah. Whatever you say.
You can fucking curse on it.
you can't, like, you don't want to be a fraud in any way, right? You don't want to act like you know more than you do, because that's transparent, but you want to know enough that you can have a legitimate conversation with somebody. Now, I know 1,000 times more on this June whatever than I did last June whatever, and that's natural, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But look, I'm not trying to fake anybody out. I'm not coming in here and being like, oh, I've been a Padre fan my whole life. Like, I got to be authentic about it and say, hey, I didn't know much. You know about Tony, you know about Winfield, broad strokes. You know about the 98 team. Like, oh yeah, I remember watching that World Series. But you got to come in and do work, if you're going to be credible even a little bit, and that's what I'm striving for.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it was interesting. Wayne was actually here a little bit earlier, Wayne Partello, and we interviewed Bob Chandler a little bit earlier here at Hess Brewing, and
Thanks, Caesar.
Thank you, Caesar. And he would mention that they brought Bob Chandler in to like kind of school the Padres employees
Just
on
last
like
week.
history. Yeah,
It was awesome.
yeah, it's amazing.
First of all, he's obviously seen, when did he start broadcasting? Like 71, 72, I think? For the
Since the
team.
beginning. Since the beginning. I
Okay,
think, yeah.
so he's seen it all. Yeah, he was like a local, TV, sportscaster before the Padres existed, and he told a story about like ripping the teletype off like the UPI wire of like the National League has awarded expansion franchises for 1969 to Montreal and San Diego. Like he ripped that off the thing as it happened. So he's seen it all, and he's obviously a great storyteller and a great dude. He came out, the whole company was there. He kind of was like, I think, up on top of the first base dugout, and we were all kind of sitting in the stands, and that was a really cool thing. And you think about who works for a team, and there's obviously a lot of local people that work for the Padres, and a lot of lifelong Padre fans. But look, it's a business, and the nature of any business is there's going to be people from all over the place. So I think especially for like the ticket sellers, the young kids that are down there trying to sell tickets, them. Again, it goes back to authenticity. The more they actually know, the less they're faking, knowledge or just not knowing things. I think the better experience that makes for everybody.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, like as fans, it's like it's kind of cool to see. I mean, like as a fan, I feel like you've never put up a front. Like you've been pretty genuine about like what you know.
You can't hide, man. It's like the internet age.
I know, right? I know, yeah.
You can't be a fraud. Like you'll be found out. There was a time, not really that long ago, right, where before Twitter, before really the internet, and you just sort of had the paper in the morning, and that was it, right? Or the 6 p.m. news on TV. Like you could kind of just whatever. But like you can't hide. You are. People know what you are. We get to talk to you guys, meet you guys, all fans, not just bloggers and Twitter, and you get people come up and say hi, and you got to talk to them. Like, we're all human beings, man.
News gets out if you're trying to be something you're not.
You're going to get found out. It's it.
Yeah. So you've been doing a lot of play-by-play on TV and on the radio this year. How's that going?
So, I mean, it's my childhood dream. Like, It's awesome. It's awesome. It's, again, all I've wanted to do since I was 9, 10, 11, whatever it was. And having the opportunity to do it, particularly this year with this team, it's fun. It's fun. And I feel really fortunate that I'm getting those at-bats, both on TV and on radio, because I'm just trying to get better. I'm working at it, and it's really hard to get better when you're not doing it. And it's a great experience. And, just getting the opportunity to have on-the-job training at the major league level is kind of stressful because, again, there's no hiding. Like, if you screw something up on a major league telecast, it's going to be on awful announcing. Like it's going to be on Deadspin or something. Like, so, it's the high wire act or whatever. But, it's awesome. It's a dream come true. And to get to have Dick Enberg as a resource, as a broadcaster, to have Ted Leitner and Mark Grant as resources of Padre stuff, to have Bob Scanlon a resource for like the X's and O's of baseball, and on and on and on with this crew, it's so valuable. It's so valuable. Like, because again, I'm not trying to pretend like I know things I don't. So I'll go to Ted and be like, hey, does this sound right? I love bouncing things off those guys.
That's cool.
When I can. It's awesome.
So, do you see that going somewhere next year?
I mean, look, I'm here to do my job. I'm here to do my job, and that stuff gets decided way above all of our pay grades. Obviously, there's a lot of really entrenched people here. A lot of really successful, talented people here. So my thing is, I'll do whatever they allow me to do, and I hope that in the long term it turns into something, and that's really all I can do.
You like being in San Diego
what's not to like?
Okay, maybe not the best question in the world.
The joke, my wife and I, we always talk about it, like this job opportunity, like if it were Detroit or Milwaukee, I'd be like, we're going, sorry, but it would have sucked for her a lot more. For me, the job is great, and that keeps me so happy and so content and so occupied. So I feel very lucky in the household of me that it was somewhere as awesome as this, because the transition would have been a lot more it's not something you know until you do it, but picking up and moving, and we don't even have kids, but picking up and moving across the country, it's a really legitimately difficult thing to do and to ask your family to do. And it was made a lot easier by the fact that we ended up here, for sure.
It's funny you mentioned Detroit. I think of the...
No offense, Detroit.
Have you ever seen the Kentucky Fried movie?
Yes, a long time ago. Is the airplane
Remember the
guys
part where
right?
he's like torturing the guy? He's all, I sentence you to Detroit. And the guy's like, no, Detroit. I kind of always vision that when people say
I'm sure Detroit is a fine city. I just think my wife probably would have had a tougher time adjusting, especially with me
compared to
gone all
San
the time.
Diego.
Exactly.
Yeah.
America's finest city, literally.
Exactly.